Let's watch some back and forth on the congressional floor as Republicans are attempting to pass legislation to end the tax-exempt status of nonprofits that they deem unworthy, of course wanting to use this to target pro-Palestinian organizations in the short term, but it could also down the line go towards defunding things like the NAACP, Planned Parenthood, etc. So let's hear what's being said and then provide the very much so needed context.
This legislation ends the flow of tax subsidies to any U.S. nonprofit that has clearly violated its tax-exempt status by providing material support to terrorist organizations.
Make no mistake, this bill is not only, and I constantly have said this to folks, this is not just about Palestinian human rights advocacy organizations. This is about the NAACP, the ACLU, Planned Parenthood, folks that have been trying to make it safe for our kids to go to school away from gun crisis and violence.
This bill is about control, it's about revenge and stifling free expression. News flash, America doesn't bow to wannabe dictators. We will not fight, we will fight your petty revenge plots at every turn. We will not stop fighting. You work for us and we do not work for you. This bill is an affront to democracy.
And Rashida Tlaib is exactly right here. This is only minimally about pro-Palestinian organizations, even though, I mean, that's just as important as any other, but it's just the easy sell for this, right? Where it's easy to get the support because of all the pro-Israeli propaganda and how deep that is to where a large portion of the country will, without hesitation, sign on to the idea that anything being pro-Palestinian is pro-terrorist because of the stigmatization of the Middle East and Arab people specifically. What it actually does, however, this bill is expand the power of the executive to be able to work with the Treasury Secretary to unilaterally remove tax-exempt status from nonprofits, effectively defunding them based off designating them as terrorist supporting organizations, which is something that will be arbitrarily defined by the Treasury Secretary, doesn't need any evidence provided, doesn't need to be pushed through a court or anything. It's just whatever they deem like this. It could be something as arbitrary as views detrimental to America. And then, what are those views? Could be anything. It could be being pro-choice, right? And supporting terrorist organizations or whatever, it's already against U.S. law. These kinds of companies could already be prosecuted for this. Like there's already means to go after companies that do this, which makes this bill redundant. And again, it's just another way for the executive to strike at organizations of whom that he or she does not agree with without having to go through a legal process, without having to give them due process, without having to have any evidence or actual basis to do it off of. It's just, hey, we don't like you, so we're going there. And it starts here with pro-Palestinian organizations. And then again, the next thing we know, Trump is defunding Planned Parenthood.
This bill giving Donald Trump and any future president unfettered power to punish civil society groups, news outlets, hospitals, and universities with zero due process. This bill is an authoritarian play by Republicans to expand the sweeping powers of the executive branch to go after political enemies and stifle political dissent. It allows Republicans to empower Donald Trump to go after enemies at will, to put out of business hospitals that provide reproductive care to women, to label environmental advocates as eco-terrorists, to target humanitarian organizations or the foundations that support them, to punish news organizations and think tanks that put out research or policies that contradict Donald Trump, to obliterate civil liberties groups who seek to protect those very liberties from authoritarianism. Americans want checks and balances, not a blank check for a president to label anyone.
Exactly. For instance, this would allow Trump to deem a news station that isn't favorable to him, CNN, under this type of classification, and then essentially pull all of their funding. Same with organizations like Planned Parenthood or others whose goals just simply doesn't align with his agenda. To go after businesses or companies that voice disdain against him. Maybe they're donating to Democrats, right? This is another attempt to just allow this sort of unfettered control in the executive that no American should be comfortable with, that the actual foundations of this country was built to prevent. And the fact that MAGA is only further shows how bad that they just want to anoint a king. A president shouldn't determine what businesses get funding and what businesses don't. Support of the president shouldn't be what determines your tax status or the success of your business. The president shouldn't have the ability to punish news corporations or organizations that won't bend to his will, and to do all of this without due process for any of these groups. I mean, it's, again, inherently anti-American, and it's truly scary stuff.
This sloppy bill thrown before us today contains everything condemned by the Supreme Court. The Treasury Department will be able to unilaterally affix the terrorist supporting label on a not-for-profit group without going to court, without offering any legal proof, without meeting any legal standard, and without giving the target an opportunity even to know the evidence against them. Although the Treasury Secretary must notify the group that it will be designated a terrorist supporting organization in 90 days, unless the Secretary is satisfied with the group's answer, it remains completely up to the Secretary to make a, quote, final agency determination without meeting any standard of proof. Once this scarlet letter and the infamy of being designated a terrorist supporting group are firmly affixed on the organization, the stigmatized then can finally go to a judge, but incredibly, the legal burden is explicitly put on them to prove they are not a terror supporting group.
And this is kind of funny to see play out in real time, because for months, MAGA was always saying how Trump is having his rights and due process is violated, and he's being unfairly targeted, and there's no evidence, and it's all this other nonsense, and how doing this is so bad and evil, and only to instantly 180 the second he wins the election and say, yeah, Trump should be able to do this to any organization or media company or anybody that he doesn't like. Like, let him do this to his political opponents without due process. We're talking about Trump's Treasury, like what this would look like in real application, right? Trump's Treasury Secretary comes up with an arbitrary and vague definition for this, like views detrimental to America. Trump then states, CNN's coverage of me is detrimental to America because it affects our political atmosphere or something, right? CNN then gets this label because then, again, they don't have to go through the courts to put the label on them. They don't have to provide even evidence. They don't even have to give evidence to we wouldn't have to give evidence to CNN about why he's applying this label on them. It's just, hey, we define this as this. You meet this definition. You're this thing. You're losing your funding. And then CNN can't even contest this until they've been labeled. So they have no way to preempt this from happening, to say, hey, we're not doing this. Here's all the evidence that we aren't. They have to be labeled this. And then they can come back and say, okay, well, now we want to fight this. Here's all the evidence that we aren't. And let's say best case, right? Best case scenario for CNN, they win. They win the appeal. They get 90 days to do it. The evidence, the onus of proof, the burden of proof is on them. It's on CNN. It's not on Trump to prove his claim. It's on CNN to disprove the claim, which, again, another kind of backwards, not how due process actually works. But then in best case, they win. They win their appeal that they have to make in 90 days or there's nothing they can do about it. And then funding is still hesitant to come back fully because of all the stigma that's placed on them. The right can discredit anything they say by saying, oh, well, you've been labeled a terrorist organization. Why would we believe reporting from a terrorist organization? And then rinse and repeat with things like Planned Parenthood. And then it's, oh, the Democratic nominee supports a terrorist organization, right? And Planned Parenthood, views detrimental to America. Well, we've deemed that being pro-choice kills American babies, and that's detrimental to America. Now Planned Parenthood is a terrorist organization. And it's just this kind of criminalization of dissent that people should find scary. This criminalization all happening outside of the courts, where Trump has all these ways that he can just attack you, and we know he's just installing yes men in his cabinet. So we know that they're not going to check him. We know the Supreme Court isn't going to check him. They've given him immunity for official acts. We can't be prosecuted for any of this. And now Congress wants to give him the power to do this, all outside of the courts, all by arbitrary definition by someone who's not elected by the people, but appointed by the president. This is the kind of stuff that MAGA unironically was foaming at the mouth to pretend that Democrats were going to do to Trump. This is unironically the kind of things you will see villains do in their backstory arc in comic books, right? And MAGA, again, was so upset that Democrats were doing this to Trump, only to turn around and instantly cheer it on the second that Trump is the one doing it, which is exactly why we can never take these clowns serious when they're trying to do their whole, we're such victims and the victim routine, because the second that they can, they're going to turn around and just actually do all the stuff that they're accusing Democrats of doing that the Democrats didn't even do.